party on campus, and it's about the fight to defend Wellington water supply. So we're going to be having three speakers. Ian Anderson, who's going to be talking about rogenomics and water metering. We're also going to be having Frank Cook, who is an engineer and going to be talking about conservation, and then Bryan Pepperell, who is a Wellington City Councillor, and we'll be discussing corporatisation of water in Wellington. After that, we'll open up the floor for discussion. If anyone's got any questions they want to ask of the speakers, feel free to go crazy, and then not too crazy. And then we will be having the film Flow for the Love of Water after that. Okay, thank you, and here's Ian.
Hello, how are you doing? Yes, so this is my talk I've prepared. It's basically I'm just going to outline sort of water corporatisation in New Zealand since like the 80s. Yeah, go, yep. Yeah, we'll start with the international context, which everyone here will probably know, but we might as well go through it anyway. So yeah, start with Chile, where profit rates are falling internationally, and you need to restore profit rates. So state assets aren't producing profit. For example, water is a state asset, rail is a state asset, etc. And so you need to restore profit rates. So neoliberalism is born. They wage a war on workers and on public, well, state provision of services. So you start with Pinochet, that's kind of the trial run where water was privatised. Move on to Thatcher, who also privatised the water. We've got Reagan, we've got Deng Xiaoping, Boris Yeltsin. Then of course in New Zealand we have Roger Douglas. But there's another Roger we're going to be talking about a lot more. Roger Kerr, who he played a major part in the electricity privatisation, and since then has played a major part in water corporatisation and attempted to push for privatisation. Okay, next up. Cool, so corporatisation specifically, because there's a lot of confusion about this, people like whether it's privatisation or corporatisation or commercialisation. Corporatisation is basically a thing where a state asset is run for profit. It's not actually run by a private firm strictly, but it's not in any way accountable. And here's what the actual purpose of it is in the large part. By separating regulatory authority from the operator and making the utility more business-oriented, corporatisation makes granting a private concession far simpler. Basically, once you start corporatising, it becomes less and less possible for public to play a role in the provision of the service. Okay, next stop. So yeah, we've got in the 90s, you know, they've attacked rail, they've attacked every other sort of state-owned service, but water remains a problem. It is still financially unproductive. It's not producing any profit, and investors want their next fix. They want to, you know, be able to make money. So they lobby to open up the water industry. You've got people like Credit Suisse, First Boston, who we're going to see a bit of in Flow for the Love of Water. They have played a major part in water privatisation internationally. Then Roger Kerr, again, who's lobbying for privatisation, you know, on the model of electricity. And in 1997, it all begins in Auckland. Okay, here you go. Here's the model. It's very similar to what we saw with electricity. It's contracted out to various organisations, council-controlled trading organisations, LATEs, private firms, anything that's basically a profit-generating entity. The water meters are made compulsory so that water can be charged on a volumetric basis. Yeah, so it's user pays. And water therefore becomes a tradable commodity. You know, private property owners can do what they like with it. Next stop. Cool. It starts off in a big way in Papakuta, where management was contracted out to United Water, which is an international corporation, and that was an explicitly privatised as opposed to corporatised model. Run for profit, charges shoot up straight off for working families. As Frank's going to talk about, there was no conservation impact, and 4 years on, 96% of Papakuta residents oppose water metering, unsurprisingly enough. Okay, next stop. And so we get organisations such as Auckland Water Pressure Group founded. Water Pressure Group specifically has 2,000 members, up to 500 refusing to pay their water bills. And when people refuse to pay their water bills, basically their water gets cut off. So, you know, you can imagine the hygiene problems that creates, the problems when someone's raising a family. So that's actually when workers start defecting from the private and corporate organisations and reconnecting the water for the people. So you get them actually digging up the pipes and reconnecting them. Of course, they get in a lot of shit, but who cares, because, you know, they've got the power, really. Next stop. You get international links increasingly being forged. In South Africa, they were having a very similar problem where the ANC swung very sharply rightwards after being elected. And so they privatised water, and so this is what's happening internationally, and they linked up with the South African Municipal Workers Union. In Bolivia, they privatised water. You had a popular uprising, and at that point, they used the Water Pressure Group fire truck to hose down the Bolivian embassy, and like the day after that, it shows up in like a Bolivian tabloid with like a red arrow between Auckland and Bolivia with the word solidaridad, solidarity. So that was pretty cool. Next slide. And we hit kind of a stalemate because actually privatisation of water becomes prohibited, and that's partly, we're going to talk about this further, but that's partly due to MMP, where you get increasing participation of sort of whatever you call it, centre-left parties. Jeanette Fitzsimmons in the early days, before she joined Parliament, was actually, you know, she was quite supportive of the anti-corporatisation movement. But we've seen it swing rightwards in the Green Party since then. Roger Kerr was kind of trying to figure out what went wrong and why they couldn't privatise. So he identified 3 barriers to privatisation, which were fragmented ownership, which is a very common neoliberal complaint that, you know, we're getting duplication of services, and if only we could simplify it and just have like a super city to run everything. You know, completely unaccountable. Next is desire by council to avoid tax, which is an interesting one, and bureaucratic inertia. And he kind of misses the main one, which is that actually people didn't want it, and you had like 2,000 people like digging up streets in order to get access to water. Next one. And here's a much more accurate assessment. Ironically, you know, this is from this enormous document on water privatisation internationally. It's a neoliberal document. It's completely about how we need to privatise everything, but it's actually like completely on target about what happened in New Zealand. In New Zealand, the serendipitous combination of the MMP voting system and the fragmented jurisdictions of local government control over water services surely provided a fertile structural context for magnifying the effects of unruly consumer activism. In other words, democracy got in the way. You had various civil society organisations, you had even Parliament, and you had a popular uprising, and fuck, all of a sudden they can't privatise the water. Next. And now we've got a comparison of South Africa and New Zealand, where again the thing that's holding it back is civil society, resistance by unions, resistance by the former supporters of the ANC, etc. Same thing is happening internationally, and that's the reason you've got a stalemate in water privatisation. Next stop. But corporatisation continues. Auckland is a step ahead of Wellington quite consistently. Metering continues, we haven't quite got that yet. Capacity gets founded on a similar model in Wellington, on a similar model to Metro Water. Manages Wellington's water services, and it's run for profit, and it's currently lobbying for metering. Sorry?